First of all, a skydiver normally doesn't think about getting killed. That's probably the last thing in your mind when you jump. But if you're going to make the jump go right, you're going to have to start with your gear. Therefore, when I pack the parachute, I do what's called a factory pack. I pack it the way it's recommended that the thing be packed, and I do it properly. When a person starts jumping as a student, they're watched over very carefully. The jump master will check their equipment for them. He's very concerned because the jump master feels that if that student goes in, gets killed or injured, that it's his fault. However, as we become what are called experienced jumpers, all of a sudden you find that people don't check your equipment anymore. I remember jumping one individual, and we were forming a formation. It was called a star. And I was watching him over my reserve where I could see my altimeter, and he just kept right on going, getting smaller and smaller against the ground. And finally I saw a white reserve blossom. Well, when we got on the ground, I asked him what it was, and he told me he lost his ripcord. When I happened to look at his gear, the ripcord housing wasn't secure. I asked him, you know, hey, why don't you take 5 minutes and take some thread, sew the thing down so it can't happen to you again. And his reply to me was, no, I'll just put it in the pocket tighter. Well, that kind of carelessness can cost you a ride on your reserve. It can cause you a fatality.
You want to pin check me, Scott? Sure.
That kind of a mentality of taking it for granted is probably one of the biggest causes of parachuting fatalities today.
Knife? Yeah, it's right here. Okay, turn around. Okay, feels like this.
Your equipment is the most important thing you have. If you don't keep your equipment up, you just don't know what you have when you go underneath the water. The greatest thing that goes wrong with scuba equipment is people not checking straps or being rotten, not checking their regulator hoses and they'll break underwater, and equipment not being attached to you properly where it catches on things and falls off. You get too sure of yourself the longer you do anything with any danger to it, and when you're too sure of yourself, you make mistakes. The habits come naturally if you learn them the right way. A lot of accidents are merely caused by people not being aware and doing very careless things. My advice to any police officer would be to learn his weapon, learn how to use it, learn the basics, and think of the weapon as part of his person.
Ivan, you encourage them to get the crowd back. Hey, move them back.
In a situation where you have a dead suspect and several police officers standing around, it would be very easy for mistakes to be made, mainly because of the fact that the officers are hypered up and in another world for a few minutes.
Okay, give me a brief rundown. Real quick, what happened?
We had a robbery suspect chasing down the alley. Got him against the wall, spun, had a gun in his hand, we dumped it.
How many officers?
3 of us involved. Myself, Beth, and Ivan.
Okay, all 3, you came down the alley together?
Myself and Beth came down in the first unit. Henry was in the second.
There's one thing that the weapon I carry on duty and the parachute I use in my hobby have in common. There is absolutely no other tool that's going to do the job when it's required.
Okay. Ivan, I want you and Bess to relieve ASAP.
The fact is that firing a properly functioning weapon is only one of many situations in which you'll come in contact with firearms. Experienced officers agree that the more you work with firearms, the greater the risk of developing habits that cause accidents. In the past, Hundreds of tragic lessons have been learned by officers who just did not understand the risks involved in being unfamiliar with or complacent with firearms. The principles we'll review here will help you handle any gun safely, those you recover from suspects, as well as your off-duty and on-duty weapons.
Is that the one you guys use?
All the way to the front.
Which one you guys use? Right there?
Step to the front. All the way to the front of the police car.
Your first concern, obviously, is to keep any weapon from firing accidentally. A discharge that isn't planned and carefully evaluated ahead of time is never an acceptable use of deadly force. You should regard any weapon you handle as ready to fire, even if it's unloaded or on safety. Of course, you wouldn't take one with you when you're drinking, or use it for showing off, or point a gun at anyone unless you're justified in using deadly force.
Controller Unit 102, man with a gun, Midway Can Company.
Whatever your situation, it's important to always be aware of your weapon's location. Experience has shown that over 1/3 of accidental discharges occur when officers exit their vehicle. For example, if the hammer's cocked and something holds the trigger to the rear, a discharge could occur as you move out. You'll want to remove your seatbelt, then shield your sidearm as you exit. By placing your left foot against the inside panel, you can avoid another accidental discharge caused by the door flying back and hitting your gun hand. In most cases, it will be safest to draw your sidearm outside your vehicle while maintaining a grip on the door with your non-gun hand.
Police, don't move!
Because a shotgun lacks the built-in safeties of a handgun, the safest procedure is to carry it with the chamber empty and the magazine fully loaded. In exiting, take a firm grip on the shotgun, swing your legs out, then put the weapon between them. You want the gun outside your vehicle, pointing straight up and free of obstructions before you emerge. Then make sure a round is in the chamber and the safety is engaged as you move. When on foot with your sidearm drawn, keep the muzzle pointed downward at an angle away from your legs. Your elbow should be bent slightly to prevent muscle strain. Your trigger finger should be placed outside the trigger guard as the weapon remains uncocked. Should you stumble, there's less chance of being hit by an accidental discharge. When moving with a loaded shotgun, use the port arms position with the safety on. You'll want to keep your arms close to your body as you maintain a visual in the direction of the suspect.
Drop the gun!
But where you're faced with handling a cocked, loaded gun that could go off accidentally, you want to safely lower the hammer and clear it before anything else. Keep in mind that your judgment about personal safety in this situation will force the scene to be altered. As you study the suspect, be able to recall in your notes later the position of his gun and rounds in the cylinder. Keep the muzzle pointed in a safe direction and make sure his finger is off the trigger. Then place the thumb of your weak hand between the cocked hammer and frame. With your other thumb holding the hammer, apply just enough trigger pressure to free the hammer. Now take your finger off the trigger, lower the hammer onto your thumbnail. Once the hammer's at rest, unload his weapon. All the time, remember that the suspect may still be a threat and armed with other loaded weapons. In rendering a found weapon safe, there are a few basic rules to follow. With this .38 Special Derringer, the breech is opened and the cartridges removed. The gun is uncocked and transported with the breech left open. Try to examine the area to see where the weapon is resting. If it's an M1 Carbine that hasn't been booby-trapped, move the safety selector switch to the on position. Now rotate the gun so it rests on its sights and remove the magazine. Next, pull the slide rod back to eject any chambered rounds. Remember in all these cases to make sure your handling the weapon is justified. If it is, remember to keep your fingers outside the trigger guard. With a bolt-action weapon, the procedure is similar for rendering the weapon safe. Locate the safety and engage it. Then release the magazine locking device. Once the magazine is removed, slide the bolt back and remove any chambered rounds. Remember to keep the bolt open as it's transported. Weapons found or recovered from suspects may not be in good working condition and may be subject to accidental discharge. For example, loose trigger movement could indicate a loose bolt assembly. This could easily permit a discharge as the bolt is closed. Some street weapons, like this .45, may discharge from pressure without even pulling the trigger. Other suspect weapons may contain a jammed cartridge requiring special care. What would you do to prevent this gun from firing accidentally? And what if you responded to this crime scene? Would you resist the temptation to touch important evidence if you didn't have to?
Please, don't move!
Experience has shown that one of the riskiest moments for an accidental discharge is when you're making an arrest.
The finger away from the trigger.
Some firearms may discharge if dropped.
Place the gun on the ground, very slowly.
So you command the suspect to surrender his gun in the safest way possible. Unlike this approach, have you ever observed an officer making an arrest like this? Do you think the situation was really under control? How would you have reacted? As you approach, remember you want to control your own gun as well as suspect weapons which may be concealed. Holster your own weapon, uncock, and keep that side away from the suspect. Even though your attention is now focused primarily on cuffing, you still want to remain aware of your weapon's location. For example, could this detective have reached his revolver quickly if he had needed it? Or would its position be more accessible to someone coming up from behind? If you're alone and your suspect has been secured in your patrol car, you now want to secure his weapons. You again use your thumb as a block to safely lower the hammer. Remove the magazine and inspect the open chamber. Then use your weak hand to pull the slide back to the locked position. With a revolver, first check to see if it's cocked. With the hammer lowered, remove any rounds. Then place your index and middle fingers under the top strap so the cylinder can't swing closed.
Chrissy's got a gun up front. Okay.
If you have a backup,
Don't
one
make
of
a
you
move.
takes charge of securing the suspect's weapon. The other's primary attention is kept on the suspect. Suspect weapons are again unloaded and secured after the suspect has been secured.
Bring it down.
While your partner is making the arrest, empty the weapon and transport both weapon and ammunition separated from each other. In most cases, the technique for transporting handguns and ammunition can be as simple as this. With practice, you should be able to avoid an accidental discharge with almost any suspect weapon, especially at night. The key is to control the suspect's hands, then his weapons. And remember, a shotgun should always be secured with the breech left open. In all cases, never secure a suspect weapon in your waistband unless you want to risk experiencing the ultimate accidental discharge. Accidents can also occur at home. For example, during cleaning, when rounds are unconsciously loaded back into the gun and the trigger is squeezed.
Hello? Oh, hi, Pete. Yeah. Hey, get away from that gun!
And even if you educate your family about firearms, neighborhood children who know nothing about guns may have the urge to handle yours if they come across them. Many officers recommend you unload your weapon as soon as you come home and then make it inoperative. A trigger lock, handcuffs, or a padlock around an open top strap will make it impossible for someone to fire your revolver. Then make the gun inaccessible by locking it in a metal storage box kept up high, with your ammunition preferably in a separate place that's cool and dry. A dresser drawer or other common hiding place is the first spot a burglar or curious child will look. And if you keep your gun in a nightstand, you may be tempted to use it when you shouldn't. Like this officer, who grabbed his gun and fired when he was still half asleep. The noise he heard in the hallway turned out to be his daughter coming home from a date. Consider one of the safer hiding places, a holster tacked to the back of the headboard. Wherever you put your gun and ammunition, be consistent so proper habits become second nature. Unlike this officer who forgot to reload his weapon before he left home and died because of an empty gun. Some accidents are not unintentional discharges, but unintentional hits. You know, for example, that shooting at a moving vehicle is not likely to stop it. Bullets can and do ricochet off windows and curved metal. In some cases, you may not even be that lucky. Shooting from a moving vehicle is equally dangerous and only increases your risk of an unintentional hit. This technique may look great in the movies, but the odds of getting on target safely are about 0. The odds of shooting holes into your hood are about 100%. And if the suspect stops to shoot it out, you'll be stuck with a partially or totally empty weapon. The theory is that warning shots help stop a fleeing felon.
Please, stop, or I'll shoot!
But they may also result in unintentional hits. If you shoot toward the ground, you may wound yourself, or the bullet may ricochet into someone else. If you shoot into the air, the suspect may not even react, and you have no control over where the bullet eventually lands. In all cases, you're responsible where all your bullets strike, regardless of intent.
I wonder if we can get some.
There, there's 2 guys having a fight out
Couple
here.
guys out there?
Yeah, and I think one of them's got a gun.
Plainclothes officers are especially vulnerable to unintentional shootings. In some cases, they are shot by uniformed officers who have not verbally identified themselves.
Please, somebody move! I'm a police officer. Don't shoot.
You take your finger off that trigger right now.
All right, don't shoot on a police officer.
I'm the police.
If you're the challenging officer, stay behind cover until you find out who you're dealing with. Announce your office in the challenge.
Okay, just keep it down. Okay, now you just step off a little bit. Both of you turn around so I can see the backs. Step away. Walk slow or you're dead.
If you're the officer challenged, a special response may confirm who you are.
Now both of you down on your knees. On your knees.
Watch it. Everybody needs a felon, watch it.
You say you're a cop. What state are you from?
California.
What's the penal code section for murder in that state?
187 PC.
How about you in front? What's the penal code section for robbery in California?
243.
Until the situation is diffused, hold your position and don't go for your ID until he gives you permission.
Get your hands up.
I got my badge on my belt, on the left side, clipped to my belt.
You turn around real slow like.
To the challenging officer, initially, you have the same status as the suspect.
Real slow. Okay, just step up.
In some situations, your loss of control over your weapon involves a malfunction that makes it impossible to fire.
Put all the bread in the back of this robbery. Hurry up. Come on, all the bread. Come on.
Officers have died because of something as obvious as forgetting to release the safety on a semi-automatic. Unless you're totally familiar with your on- and off-duty weapons, stress can force you to forget almost anything. Excessive roughness can throw the cylinder out of time and prevent live rounds from firing. Exposure to snow, rain, and continued lack of care finally caught up with the officer who owned this gun. It only failed him once. On the left is a live cartridge which never fired from that revolver. The hammer fall was so light and off-center, the primer couldn't detonate. On the right is a fired primer from a revolver which had been cared for. If you drop a handgun, you can expect the front sight to become bent or broken off, or the hammer can break off, or the ejector rod may become bent so you can't eject spent casings any further than this. If you use a semi-automatic and slam in a magazine or drop it, the lips may become bent. The magazine won't seat properly and may not feed a new cartridge into the chamber after you pull the trigger. Instead, you'll want to gently insert the magazine to ensure that live rounds will fire properly. Disregarding your weapon through complacency or poor attitude has resulted in many officers losing a finger or losing an eye. Your weapon is a precisely crafted instrument. In fact, 4 million guns of this same model alone have been manufactured, with tolerances held within 0.002 of an inch. The same quality and care went into manufacturing this semi-automatic with over 15 moving parts. Here, there are over 20 moving parts which simultaneously make this shotgun fire. You want to maintain your weapon as close as possible to factory condition, so you avoid hot rodding it, adding accessories, customizing parts, or adjusting tension springs. Hot rodding may be okay for competitive combat target shooting, but on the street, every change increases your chance of a malfunction.
Robert, put all the bread in the basket. Come on, hurry up. Put it in the sack. Hurry up.
Here, the malfunction was caused by a trigger shoe. The holding screw worked loose, allowing the shoe to slip down to where it jammed the trigger. The result was a weapon which couldn't fire. Numerous officers have died because of another avoidable weapon malfunction.
So, Robert, put all the bread in the basket. Let's go. Move. Police, don't move.
On this semi-automatic, the recoil spring had been shortened. Some officers shortened the spring to make the slide move easier, but without its full length and strength, the slide may fail to feed the cartridge up into the chamber. You can further minimize the risk of a malfunction by routinely checking your weapon. With an unloaded revolver, first check the barrel. Is it free of bulges? Is it tight? Are the sights firm? Is the bore clear of obstructions? Work the ejector rod several times. Is it straight and moving freely? Is its tip screwed on tight? If it's loose, the cylinder will not open and close properly. Now close the cylinder and see if it rotates smoothly without skipping as you dry fire. Does the hammer nose enter the bushing far enough to fire? Is the firing pin secure? With the hammer held back slightly and your finger off the trigger, gently attempt to rotate the cylinder. If you can see or feel any pronounced movement, this is an indication the revolver is out of time and in need of repair. Check the screws on the side plate and grip panels to be sure they are firmly in place. When you load again, it's a good idea to have some cushion for your shells should they drop. If they land on the primer on a rough, hard surface, they can detonate. Here you're concerned with the same serviceability checks, especially since semi-automatics have more moving parts than revolvers. First, make sure you're empty by removing the magazine. Next, check the action of the safety to make sure it moves properly. You also want to check the slide action. Pull back the slide to make sure it moves smoothly and that the stop works, and that no live rounds are in the chamber. Inspect the ejection port and magazine well for obstructions. With the hammer release safety on, let the slide spring forward. The slide should return smoothly to its original position. With the hammer cocked and the safety in the fire position, engage the manual safety which allows the hammer to move forward. Now engage and disengage the safety again from its rest position to ensure that the safety and hammer function properly. Examine the magazine carefully for dents on the side. A worn-out magazine spring can also be a cause of failure to feed. When you insert a good magazine, be sure it clicks and locks into position. If it doesn't, the gun will probably not fire. In some cases, because of your shift, you may have to use a location like this for a serviceability check. However, if at all possible, do the check on the range, or while standing over a large metal container filled with sand. Accidental discharges in locker rooms are something you've heard about, right? Just remember, they're rooted in the kind of negligence your fellow officers may never forgive you for. Occasionally, even a serviceability check on a semi-automatic will fail to feed or eject rounds while shooting. You may be able to correct this situation if you pull the slide to the rear, then tilt the gun to the side, which allows the shell to eject. An alternative is to release the magazine, then pull back the slide and lock it. The jammed action may then correct itself. The magazine can be reinserted and proper operation resumed. With a shotgun, a daily serviceability check is crucial because the weapon is shared with other officers, and you can't be certain how they may have used or abused it. Perform the checks with the shotgun empty. Each shell should be carefully extracted from the magazine loading port rather than from the side ejection port. This procedure will help prevent an accidental discharge. You want to inspect the barrel for obstructions, using your fingernail inside to help reflect light. To test the safety, push it on. Then squeeze the trigger. If the safety works properly, the trigger will not click. At some point, you may have reason to check the effectiveness of the firing pin. With the safety engaged, carefully remove the magazine cap and remove the barrel. Now, cock the shotgun. Place a penny against the firing pin hole and hold the penny in with one finger. When you pull the trigger, the pin should hit the coin with enough force to dent it. Here the dent is centered between Lincoln's ear and nose. If the firing pin doesn't dent the coin, it's probably broken and it won't detonate your shells. Just as you need to know your gun, you need to know your ammunition too. There's an incredible variety of .38 caliber and 9mm handgun ammunition manufactured in this country. But while two cartridges may look similar and even be the same caliber, they are not necessarily interchangeable. Some officers tried to load a .357 Magnum cartridge into a .38 special revolver. It doesn't work. A 16-gauge shotgun shell placed in a 12-gauge shotgun fits loosely. If a 12-gauge shell is then placed behind it, the gun can explode if fired. Only a 12-gauge shotgun shell belongs in a 12-gauge shotgun. Selecting the right ammunition also involves getting it from a reliable source. Reloads may be okay for the range, but your department should insist on factory-loaded ammunition only for use on duty. The quality control of reloads in general is such that they may carry too much powder with these results. A blown-out cylinder and shell casing, or an exploded top strap, or an exploded barrel. Reloads may also not carry enough powder. In this example, 4 bullets were fired in succession, and all 4 stopped inside the barrel. Of course, even factory ammunition is sometimes susceptible to manufacturing errors. Notice the improper rim area at the base of these cartridges. Neither will seat properly inside a cylinder. This one will. Here's why you want to replace your ammunition at least every 4 to 6 months. Exposure to inclement weather in belt loops or dump pouches can corrode ammunition. Over a period of time, it can become useless. This officer found himself fired at point blank. Fortunately, the offender's ammunition was so old, the bullet lodged inside the barrel. Faulty leather gear can be as dangerous to you as faulty ammunition or a faulty sidearm. Have you ever seen leather gear like this? If your holster doesn't have the right balance between holding your gun securely and letting you draw it smoothly, you may not have a gun to fire, either because it fell out without your noticing it, or because you couldn't get it out fast enough to get on target first. You can quickly test any holster. With your gun empty and the holster unsnapped, jump up and down vigorously. After 6 jumps, you should still be armed.
You have some identification on you?
Your duty holster should also be high riding and close to your body. Your leather gear should be worn at waist level, and your handcuff case preferably worn on the side opposite your gun. A cross-draw holster may look impressive, but there's the risk of the hammer spur hanging up in your clothing. You also expose everything through a 90-degree arc to a possible premature discharge. If you use your gun butt for an armrest, you risk stretching the leather out of shape and making your weapon less secure. If you fail to check frequently for signs of wear, something like this may happen, especially with a swivel holster. Or you may keep losing spare ammunition and not know it. Unless you clean out your holster periodically with a vacuum cleaner, lint and other debris may work their way into the action of your gun. You want to keep the bottom open and unplugged, or cut a hole in your holster if one isn't there. The important thing is to decide if handling firearms properly is worth the practice and awareness it takes. Your survival may depend on the same care you exercise around any equipment. Woodworking tools, your personal car, or equipment used in a life-threatening sport. Right now to handle firearms safely, a lot of officers thought they were and got shot or died because good habits were never important enough until it was too late.